I do have, before we turn to some domestic issues, I want to ask what your opinion is of Trump when he was delaying and extorting Zelensky for military funding at the end of his administration.
So look, I think Trump was pressuring Zelensky to provide information that he had. I think the impeachment based on it was not an impeachable offense. If you actually look at the allegations of quid pro quo, the only person who really engaged in a quid pro quo was Joe Biden. And Biden, when he was vice president, explicitly engaged in a quid pro quo and cut off military aid to Ukraine. And for that matter, Biden last year twice cut off military aid to Ukraine in April and December, in both instances pressuring Ukraine to cede sovereignty over the Donbass region to Russia.
Understood, Senator. But I'm asking you specifically about Donald Trump and his delaying and how you felt about that.
Look, my views on Trump, I don't like the rhetoric that Trump used with respect to Russia and Putin. I don't like the rhetoric, particularly in Helsinki. I think it was an enormous mistake. I don't know why Trump fails to call out Putin for the vicious thug that he is. I will say this, though, even though I don't like Trump's rhetoric, and I said it at the time, I've said it many, many times since then, that we should be far clearer and more unequivocal in denouncing Putin and calling him out for who he is. If you look on the merits of the policy, on any measure, Trump's policies were far tougher on Russia than Joe Biden's were, or for that matter, than Barack Obama's were. If you look substantively, Trump signed my sanctions legislation on Nord Stream 2 into law. In fact, he did so twice. I passed one sanctions bill in 2019, and then I passed a second one, an even tougher sanctions bill, in 2020. Trump signed both of those into law. As a result, Trump stopped Nord Stream 2. Putin didn't invade. You know, it was interesting, probably, a month ago. We were in a classified briefing, all 100 senators, and a Democratic senator stood up and asked Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, said, why didn't Putin invade in 2017 or 2018 or 2019 or 2020? And I got to admit, I and several other senators began laughing because the answer was obvious, which is that Putin didn't want to mess with America and mess with Trump. I think Trump was a far more effective deterrent to Putin than Biden was. And Biden, unfortunately, the philosophy of this administration on foreign policy, if you look at every enemy on earth, they govern from a perspective of weakness and appeasement. And whether it is Russia or China or Iran or Venezuela, we see this administration making concessions, trying to give billions of dollars to our enemies. And if history teaches anything, it's that appeasement invites military conflict.
Sure. I was going to shift over to
come
domestic.
back, Jason.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. The only thing that I was going to say, and I'll turn it over to Vince, but the only thing I was going to say is that many people would argue that this invasion didn't happen because Russia was getting a lot of what it already wanted, which was to weaken NATO, which NATO, of course, Donald Trump, during the primaries that you were a part of, Donald Trump questioned NATO and its relevance altogether. So all of the things that Putin says that he wants, they were already kind of getting that out of Donald Trump. But I'll turn it over to Vince.
Well, let me jump in. Let me jump in and make the point,
because it's important. You're right that there are people making that argument, who are Democratic partisans, but it's not an argument that has any force on the face of it. If you actually look at Trump, look, I agree with you. I don't like Trump's rhetoric when it came to Russia. And I actually think some of it is that he just got sort of stubborn when people began criticizing him for it. He's like, all right, screw you. I'm not going to change it. I wish he had changed his rhetoric. But if you actually look at NATO, NATO was stronger and Trump strengthened NATO.
Yeah.
Why? Because he went over and he demanded of European nations, increase your contributions to defense. And he said, you know what? We're not going to defend you unless you invest more in defense. And for a long time, NATO had encouraged free riding, where basically European nations funded their welfare state and didn't invest at all in the military defending themselves and counted on the US military to defend them. And
Right.
Trump went and said, look, if you want us to stand with you, step up to the plate and actually invest in defending yourself as well.